We're four friends with hot takes on food media.
And we're here to review and recap all kinds of food shows in bite-sized seasons.
Plus, virtual potlucks, cooking adventures, and food memes.
Welcome to Pod Appétit Gourmet Takes.
Hi everyone, it's me, Meg, and I'm here to introduce this very special bonus episode. A couple of months ago, we were approached by the moderators of the food subreddit to host recurring Reddit talks. A Reddit talk is a live audio event. It's kind of like a live podcast, or like an audio version of Reddit's popular Ask Me Anything interviews, also known as AMAs. We've since had the distinct pleasure of hosting pie art extraordinaire The Pious, and even J. Kenji Lopez Alt. Though we unfortunately weren't able to record those talks, we're happy to bring you our latest. This bonus episode is a recording of the live Reddit talk from November 30th, 2021, with special guests, the Butcher Girls. Erika Nakamura and Jocelyn Guest are the founders of the Butcher Girls, a virtual butcher shop that brings sustainable, delicious meats from regenerative farms to your door. You can find out more about them and their business by going to ny.butchergirls.co, which we've also linked in the show notes. This audio has been minimally edited and was not recorded with our usual equipment, so if it sounds a little different, that's why. Also, I forgot to press record until about 5 minutes into the talk, so we'll pick up the interview with the Butcher Girls answering the question, what advice would you give to someone who wants to work with a butcher but doesn't know where to start? All right, please enjoy and stay tuned for more talks.
In a more central place so that people can just dive into their big cuts of ribeyes and skirt steaks and the things that you like, the repeat offenders, if you will. But a lot of folks don't really have access anymore to this kind of a new wave of whole animal butcher, which I think Jocelyn and I are. So I think it's really important to try to seek it out as much as possible. But in the process, finding your local farmer at the farmer's market is also a fantastic place to start.
But I think, sorry, Erika just muted herself. I think another important thing to think about is, I remember when I walked into a butcher shop before I knew jack about meat, and I was so intimidated. And I think that the thing that can help customers is that, butchers are just such enormous nerds about what they do, and they care about it so much. So I think, be the annoying person on the other side of the counter and, ask a million questions and, be like, where did it come from? When did it come in? What do you like to do with this cut? Blah, blah, blah. Because I think, at least speaking for myself and speaking for Erika, we love to kind of wax poetic about all this stuff. So I think giving butchers that chance to kind of hear themselves talk, basically, they'll be super psyched.
We all love going off on our niche interests, right? Definitely a way to break the ice. So what first drew you to butchering? What was it about butchering? And also, before you answer that, people in the audience, please feel free to raise your hand to ask your own question. There's a little icon in the lower left-hand corner that's a hand. If you click on that, we'll invite some of you up to the stage for questions. So yeah, Jocelyn and Erika, what is it about butchering?
I started as a writer after college, so I never actually intended to become a butcher. I kind of fell into it backwards. But basically, I found it, I think the way a lot of people in food find it, which is, I was in a kitchen and not super psyched about the protein I was seeing that was coming in, and also not super psyched about working till 3 a.m. every night. And I kind of found my path that way. My first job as a butcher was working for Erika in LA. And I heard about this women-owned shop, and I was super psyched because usually it's, I think there are more and more women working in meat, but I think it's still very much a male-dominated space. So I had this sort of very skewed entree where I was like, oh, dude, it's just a bunch of chicks around a butcher block. This is dope. But once I started doing it, I just fell in love with it and kind of never looked back.
For me, growing up, I was actually a vegetarian, more for animal rights purposes, because I guess I don't know, I saw some like really intense pig slaughter video on like NHK, which is like the Japanese like kind of like PBS kind of vibe. And I was like super freaked out and horrified, and I was like, no, this cannot be. So I tried really hard to be a vegetarian in Japan, which is also kind of difficult. And then later when I moved to the US and kind of was like going through my early adult life of being like essentially like a cheese pizza-tarian. I think it's like so easy to not necessarily eat super well when you're a vegetarian, especially when you don't really kind of like have access to understanding what your body is needing, you know, from a nutrition perspective. So I started doing a little bit more digging, and the deeper I went, the more I realized that, you know, it's not necessarily like if you can't beat him, join him, but the idea of like wanting to actively change a food system really, I don't know, it kind of really ate away at me to the point where I realized that like activism for me looked like becoming a butcher and providing an alternative, like a really healthy alternative for, you know, environmentalism, what kind of like, you know, the industrial food system is doing to the earth, as well as, you know, also like the more humane aspects of sourcing protein that you can really get behind. So, you know, I went to culinary school, so I certainly had like an interest for good food there. But, you know, as I kind of worked in the restaurant industry as well, you know, similarly to Jocelyn, I just kept seeing, like, I would go to these like super expensive restaurants and I'd be like, wow, like why is everything so expensive? And then you start realizing actually when you work in the industry, like there's like a food cost method, right? So like most restaurants try to like spend about 25% of what they're bringing in on their food cost. So then when you actually start thinking about what the markup is and how much the restaurant actually paid for their protein to get this like honkin' steak on your plate or whatever, you know what I mean? Like you kind of like start doing the math backwards and you realize like, oh, this protein only costs like, you know, like less than $5 maybe on your plate. And then you're like, ooh, okay. Like, I don't know. To me, I want to spend money on good food because it's going into my body and that's how I'm going to respect my body. You know what I mean? So the more I kind of like did that investigative work, the more I was drawn to wanting to make an impact from the inside out. And it also, you know, certainly doesn't, you know, it's not lost on me that my background's also in sculpture. So kind of like backwards, you know, like, or I guess like subtractive sculpture, if you will. And anatomy just felt very natural to me in terms of trying to take carcasses apart. So I think I am also satiated from a creative perspective that way.
Subtractive sculpturing, that's a really fascinating way to look at it. That's so cool. So actually you were mentioning about how to ethically source meat, how your experience as a vegetarian and trying to eat sustainably, how this led you down this path of trying to approach butchering in a more sustainable, ethical way. And you talk in your website a lot and in interviews about regenerative farming. Could you maybe explain that a little bit more in depth? What does a regenerative farm look like? What do they do?
Yeah, so basically regenerative farming is this really incredible technique that, you know, farmers used to use. It just used to be the way that everything worked. And now kind of just like eating locally, eating seasonally, it's become new again. So our beef farmer, for example, their farm is called Autumn's Harvest. They're up in the Finger Lakes. They bought this kind of like piece of crap piece of land, like maybe a decade and a half. And it was really barren and it wasn't beautiful. And Tim and Sarah, the farmers we work with, used their Murray cattle to exactly like regenerate the land. Like, so by grazing in a rotational way, like, you know, from hillside to hillside, field to field, and not just like completely ravaging one area. And then also by these animals then, you know, eating, and then as everybody does, pooping into the earth, like all of those nutrients in their poop helped the farm come alive again, which is really great. I think that's the big difference between livestock farming and veggie farming, because veggie farming can often like so easily just like strip the topsoil of all of its nutrients without putting anything back into it. But these guys, between doing veggie farming and animal farming, they create complete that circuit. You know what I mean? So like maybe one summer they're growing lettuces or whatever it is, and the following summer they'll put cows on that pasture so that it's not just like take, but then instead these cows help bring the pasture back to life, if that makes sense.
Yes, definitely. I'm sure that there is so much more we could learn, but thank you for the overview about what that means. And to everyone who's listening, if you're just now joining us, we are speaking with Jocelyn Guest and Erika Nakamura, the founders of The Butcher Girls, an online butcher shop and subscription service. And if you would like to ask them a question, please click the little hand icon in the lower left-hand corner to be invited to this stage. And I see that we do have a question in the comment section from Absolute23. They ask, feelings on Salt Bay?
Oh my god. Like real feelings? I have lots of feelings. Erika, do you have feelings?
Yes. I mean, how could you not? Like, look at that sexy bod. Just kidding. You know what? Here's the thing is that when it comes to like, cause I care so much about like the quality of the meat, right? And like, I guess there's some element of performance that goes into any sort of, like food fanfare these days, so to speak, right? Like, it's like if you're a chef, like you're kind of a performer on TV half the time. But when I take a look at what Salt Bay is doing, I feel like it's like kind of perpetuating this theater around like incredibly expensive, and like luxurious food. So then it poses the real question to me, which is like, how luxurious is that food? You know what I mean? Is it the experience and the price tag that comes with it? And the performative elements of like sprinkling, pieces of pretty princess salt all over your meat. Or is it like, where is that coming from? Like, where is that meat coming from? And I just really have a very difficult time, reconciling that kind of information in my brain, because it just kind of like feeds that exact same idea that, of like this kind of like wasteful, consumer behavior that we currently are struggling to kind of like get over, so that we can maybe be a little bit kinder to the environment and kinder to our bodies. So those are my feelings.
My other feeling is I wonder if he actually, I don't know if anybody else saw that thing on the internet about how he was trying to hire a chef for $16, and I'm very curious if he found a human that was willing to do that.
I hope not, when he's slinging $3,000 steaks or what have you.
Yeah, exactly.
That same user also asked, and I was wondering this myself, do you have a favorite cut of meat?
Favorite cut of meat is like, it's such a great topic of conversation, because it's one of my favorite things to ask customers when they walk into a butcher shop. And it is also a question that is on our questionnaire, for every single customer currently. But, the reason why we ask is because I think most of the time people are like, oh, my favorite cut is, and I can guess, it's usually ribeye, New York strip, filet, right? Like, that's like one category of human. And then there's another category of person who's like, oh, I like a skirt steak, a hanger steak, right? And then the next category below that, I think, is like the chicken breast kind of person. So I personally, my favorite cut is none of the above, to ask, or to at least answer your question. Mine kind of changes seasonally, and it also, depends less on the exact cut and more on like what it looks like before I've prepared it. Meaning like, how much marbling is there? How lean is it? How fatty is it? Like that kind of stuff. And what I want to do to it, right? So like, I think about more like seasonal, like preparation, favorite preparation, like right now, because it's actually starting to flurry outside. and I'm thinking about like something delicious to braise. So that might end up being, like a short rib. And today I actually just cut up a tri-tip that's just like super duper sexy. So, that's kind of like, I would like to eat that immediately. But if it's a quick sear cut, one that you can just kind of like pan fry or pan roast, that's usually going to be a flat iron steak for me. And I think Jocelyn will agree with that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think thinking about your favorite cut is kind of like thinking about your favorite movie. It's like, is it like the movie that you say is your favorite, so you sound super cool, or is it the movie that like you're always gonna watch like every weekend, which is usually like You've Got Mail. So I think for me, like if it's the thing you watch every day or like could consume every day, I feel like ground beef is my jam because I will never not eat a burger. But then, like Erika said, I definitely agree about the flat iron too, and I think it's funny that it's become kind of like this darling cut in recent years, but it's so damn delicious.
Yeah, I suppose butchering, just like any other type of food, definitely has its trends, and that totally makes sense what you're saying. Like, well, it depends what mood you're in. What do you want to eat? We have another question from the audience. Grounded Kush asks, what are your favorite items for a charcuterie spread?
When you think about building a charcuterie board, I think it's really important to kind of go for diversity and more because based on your crowd, right? So if that's just you, then like have at it. Like who the hell cares? Because you're gonna get down with it. But if you do have guests coming over, I really like to think about also like my vegetarian friends who end up coming. So like I'll maybe like put a wall of cheese between like the fruits and nuts and the meatier fare. I think that can kind of be a great thing to think about. Or even like kind of your jams and like fruit compotes and stuff can kind of go towards the center. But aside from that, again, seasonality is such a big thing, and the reason for it is because when you can really think about what fruits are the ripest and juiciest and like sweetest at the time, or if you can think about like what kind of nuts are going to go really well with those fruity items, and then kind of like I usually think about like a soft runny stinky cheese, a semi-hard like neutral cheese that everyone can get down with, and then like a hard sharp cheese. So those are kind of like the three cheeses I think about. And then when it comes to the dry cured stuff, like it's two ways of thinking about it. Like, is this gonna sit there all night for people to pick at and you have to replenish, or is it just kind of like an early appetizer element that you can kind of serve and then take away before the main course begins, right? Because depending on that, like it's about like, and then also like, is this outside or inside? Because like, how hot is it going to get out there? Is it going to start looking like wilty and sad? Or is it going to like, can you like kind of ride that line and, keep replenishing and make it look great? So, for me, at least with like the dry cured stuff, so like salumis, I think about, like always a sopressata, something super spicy. I think about copa, which has like, some really luxurious fatty bits to it. I think that prosciutto, especially like a nice aged prosciutto, can be really great for like everyone. People usually love that. And then maybe like a Genoa salami or something kind of that is like studded with black peppercorns. And then if you're actually, because I know I was just going on and on about like temperature and stuff. I think if it's going to be more indoors and like maybe during a cooler season, you can also throw out like, chicken liver mousse or pate of some sort. We do pork and pistachio terrine that is like out of this world, and I feel like it would do really well on a charcuterie plate during like a cooler season. Yeah.
You had me at wall of cheese. All right, going to the comments section. Mr. Galax22 asks, do you have thoughts on how meat production could be done more sustainably in a mass way? Would it be impractically expensive, or how would you incentivize big companies to do that? Pretty big question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the question, like that's what we all need to figure out. And I think that's what we're working on figuring out a lot on our end, kind of dipping a toe into wholesale to restaurants and things of that nature. Because I think just like on a smaller scale with a butcher shop where like if you sell your ribeyes for X amount of dollars, then you can sell your ground beef for less, obviously. And like that is kind of the magic ticket to completing that whole animal circuit and keeping everything as sustainable as possible. I think it would require, so much work and so much planning, and we definitely haven't figured it out. Like I know there's a restaurant group in New York City that buys, I think there's like 4 or 5 restaurants in the group, and they all buy animals together, and then they're broken down at one restaurant and kind of like fanned out to the other satellites, which I think would probably be the closest you could get to it. But I think, I don't know. I'm kind of dancing around the answer because I don't know the answer yet. I think it would take, not only the actual act of processing, which is, an expensive pursuit in and of itself, like finding people who will treat the animal humanely and respectfully before and after it's slaughtered, but also restaurants who are willing to kind of, pay a little bit more for maybe a smaller portion. Same thing with customers. Like, I think we all just need to I don't think it's just a question of finding a way to have sustainable processing financially, but also it requires restaurants and customers to sort of join in that fight at the same time.
To me, I think so much about where's the problem originating? To me, I think a lot of it has to do with the lack of understanding around labor. Like, what is the real price tag that we as people want to put on labor, right? Because we want everything to be so cheap, but then are people just not being paid well enough? So Jocelyn and I focus so much on trying to actually pay people what we want to get paid, because it's how do you support a family? How do you, these are big questions. And in the process of it, I think that, if there was a better understanding as a society of where our standards are, and healthcare and things like that, what do people deserve in the food industry? Because we're not, in a lot of ways, we're not given the kind of same allowances that, people who work in tech might, or people who, work an office job might. Jocelyn and I think fantasize a lot about the perks that come with an industry like that, because we wish that we could take 2-week vacations and still get paid, and stuff like that. So we apply ideas like that, at least in a small scale for ourselves. But I think ultimately there has to be a willingness for people to want to flip the bill for good food, and for the hardworking people who are producing that food, right? Whether it's the farmer, whether it's the butcher, whether it's the cook, I think that kind of is a supply chain in and of itself. And then here we are expected to work like dogs to make it cheaper, right? On the other hand, I also find that, I think a lot about how companies are always trying to scale up, trying to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And sure, as a super tiny business, we, those are our goals too, right? But when it comes down to it, I think you have to take some of these big giant companies and break them down into smaller production hubs, so that there is a little bit more quality and maintenance around how the food is actually being processed, right? And that's vegetables as well as meat, So if you have better work conditions, if you have, smaller processing environments where they're not slaughtering thousands of animals a day, but maybe, something mid-scale, we're working with processing facilities that probably do 10 to 15 animals, a week, right? But then there's other ones that probably will are comfortable doing 20 or 30 a day, right? And that's actually probably a comfortable volume of work where the inspecting can still be done at like a much more solid level, and we can expect our food supply to still like to be clean, right? Like, so we don't like maybe have like less of an issue with things like E. coli, less kind of like foodborne issues, less, labor issues. And somewhere in there, I feel like we could actually drive costs down, especially if we can kind of like maintain some level of like integrity there. I think we're really, really far away from that, because I don't think that that's really where like the focus is right now. Like, here we are, living in a world where like Epicurious just fully did without like what they like are no longer printing recipes about, that involve meat, for example. And so, I think the big concern I have is that like it's like traveling kind of farther away from at least what I think is possibly the answer.
Are you reading newspaper? Hello, please wait.
Sorry about that. Please continue, Erika.
No, it's okay. I don't know. I think that like, what I was saying about like traveling further away from what I think is the answer is that like, I think like doing away with responsibly raised proteins, I think is eventually going to like damage the earth. You know what I mean? Like the idea that like Jocelyn and I subscribe to around regenerative agriculture and how that's actually going to benefit the soil. It's going to benefit clean water, right? I have a hard time understanding how we're going to like, make changes that impact the earth positively through like more processed food, more like industrialized, industrialized kind of like meatless, like nutrients, I guess. So I don't know if anyone has any answer around that, like I'm so game for the conversation, because I think we're all kind of stuck in a moment of philosophizing around what's actually good for the planet these days, right?
It's definitely the $1 million question. And I think if we had one easy answer, I hope that we would have implemented it by now. But really appreciate hearing your thoughts, especially with your insider perspective. Definitely learned a lot. And for everyone who's just now joining us, we are speaking with Erika Nakamura and Jocelyn Guest. They are the founders of the Butcher Girls, which is an online butcher store and subscription service. If you would like to ask your questions live, please go ahead and raise your hand by clicking on the raised hand icon in the lower left-hand corner, and we'll see about getting you on the stage. And in the meantime, going to the comments section, let's see. I had one and then I lost it. Just one moment. All right. Shahzad asks, is there a smarter way to learn how to cook than just repeating? So what I interpret that to mean is, are there other ways to get better at cooking than just making the same dish over and over?
I mean, while practice makes perfect, or like, as I like to say, wax on, wax off in the butcher shop, I do think that a lot of it is curiosity, right? Like, first of all, like you want to stay curious and stay excited about what you're doing, because I think that'll keep you coming back for more, and if you fail, to try it again, right? Like, it doesn't have to be the same recipe, but like, it's like, oh, I burnt this steak, so like I don't actually like to cook steak, would like be a sad response, like, whereas like I'm going to try to nail it next time, because then, I can like one more notch on my belt, and then I can like have people over and like, crush dinner. Like I kind of like that idea. And I also just think more and more that, asking questions, like finding people who will like actually, help you is really important. Like, people ask me all the time, my friends ask me all the time, like when they come over for dinner, oh, how did you do that? Oh, like, what recipe do you like? What, it's like, all these are like great questions, because half the time I find that, like, especially with like recipes that exist on the internet, like I'm pretty good at cooking, PS, right? Like I've been a chef, I've like blah 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 whatever, and I'll find recipes that I'm like, what the hell is this? Like I don't know how to do this, because because the wording is weird, or because the procedure seems like kind of backwards from what I would do, but so I feel like there's definitely like good information out there, and there's like not great information out there. So it's just about, like engaging folks in conversation and people who in your life, or like who've tried recipes before that they like. And a lot of times I feel like if the recipe is written well, and if you can like read it through before you get started and you kind of have a plan, then you're gonna muddle through, and I feel like you'll do a pretty good job.
Definitely. That actually relates to another question we had also from Grounded Kush. They were wondering, is there any training courses or schooling for learning to be a butcher, or is this one of those things where you have to get in there and learn on the job?
I think, they teach you a little bit of butchery in culinary school, and there's one program in particular that's really awesome at CUNY, or SUNY Cobleskill rather, up in the Catskills in New York, which is really great. They do a lot of slaughter as well, so it's not for the faint of heart. But otherwise, I mean, I did an apprenticeship, so did Erika. I don't know of any butcher shops that do formal apprenticeships anymore, where you kind of like pay them and then work for a couple months, but you don't have to do maybe as much like walk-in scrubbing as you would if you were just like, hi, I'm here to learn, like, and also kind of like ingratiate yourself in that way. But I think honestly that's the best way to do it, probably, is like to find people that you like and respect, and find time to kind of give them a few hours here or there. And if you can afford to give them part-time or full-time, then you'll just learn that much faster. Otherwise, there are places that offer one-off classes like pig butchery, or like how to make jerky, or how to cut down a lamb or make sausage. But I think if you really want to learn the craft, it's best to just find a shop you like and put in some hours.
Which you all have definitely done. And since you're the experts, I'm going to ask a very specific question from the comment section. Jamaican Mans asks, I'm trying to surprise my wife with a nice homemade steak dinner for our 9-year anniversary. Congratulations, Jamaican Mans. What would be an ideal cooking time for stovetop ribeye? And how long should I put it in the oven for if I want it to be medium? Any steak suggestions?
All right, so couple additional questions from over here in the Butcher Shop Peanut Gallery, which is, how thick is this steak? That's number one. Number two is how cold is the steak? Meaning, like, was it in your fridge until you decided to pull it out and cook it right away, or does it get to sit out for a little bit? So there are a lot of variables, right? The other thing is, how recently was your oven calibrated? And then lastly, do you have a meat thermometer? So those are like the most important questions. The reason for it is because the thickness of the steak is going to dictate how quickly it cooks, right? Same with like the temperature of the steak. So like if you take out an ice cold steak from your refrigerator and then you decide to like salt it and throw it straight onto a pan, it's going to cook at a different time than if it's been sitting out for like maybe 30-40 minutes. I know that sounds weird, but it's totally what they do in the kitchen in real life. So you want to let it hang out for a little bit so it's almost at room temperature, so it's not ice cold. You want to pat it dry, make sure that like there's no like juices hanging around on the surface. If you have time to salt it in advance, and by advance I mean like a few hours, like up to 6 hours, even overnight in advance, you want to go ahead and do that, because and like it kind of like pulls, like salt draws moisture out of the steak, and then the steak will actually kind of like reabsorb that moisture. So that means that it's almost kind of like brining, or like it's like adding an element of flavor that kind of penetrates that barrier, goes inside the steak. So it's going to taste better on the finish. You want to make sure that you pat it dry. If you haven't salted it, salt it right before you cook it, instead of like 15 minutes, because then it's going to be super wet and then you're not going to get like a crispy good sear on it. That's super duper important. And then go in. I always go into like a screaming hot pan. Get it get your exhaust going, open up your windows, do whatever you have to do. I always go like so hot that, I'm no stranger to setting off the smoke alarm. So anyway, you want it to be nice and crispy before you flip it. Same vibe again, like get it nice and crispy on the bottom. If it's a steak that is, I would say, more than like half an inch, I mean, if you have a ribeye, like go for the gold, like go for like at least an inch, if not an inch and a quarter. I think that's a good thickness. You get a good sear on both sides, get it into the oven at like 375. So make sure to preheat your oven. If you got like an inch and a quarter steak, it's been sitting out, like no variables, then you should be able to get it to cook medium in about, I would say, 10 to 12 minutes. But that's like if you don't have any real variables. Reason why I asked if you have a meat thermometer is because the real way to tell if you're at the right temperature is to actually temp the meat. So I would insert the thermometer probe away from the bone so it's not touching, straight to the middle, and you're looking for a read of about I would say like 120, 125 tops, so that when you pull it out and it's resting, because you have to rest your steak, it's going to bump up the temperature. Like there's something called residual heat that will occur. So it's like continues to cook even once it's not in a pan anymore. And the juices are starting to settle into the meat and redistribute. You're looking at like 135 for a nice medium. So it'll jump up all the way up to that point. Make sure to rest your steak for like maybe, I would say, like at minimum 15 minutes, but closer to like 30 minutes. And you can tent it with foil and like let it hang out for a little bit. But you really want to rest it so that all those beautiful juices don't end up on your plate, but they go into your mouth with the steak.
Awesome. I love hearing experts get into the nitty gritty. Jamaican Mans, I hope you were taking notes. He says, thank you so much. I have a lot to take into account. We have another question from Captain Punsworth, and he says, I've read that more humane slaughter methods improve the quality of the meat. The stress hormones released by the animal can affect the flavor texture. Is there truth to this?
I think there is truth to that. I think, Erika and I, sorry if this grosses anybody out, but we fully talk about how you can like taste sad pork, which is true. You know what I mean? I mean, when an animal's going to slaughter, the places that we work with have them dropped off the night before so that everyone can mellow out, and they don't do like 10,000 pigs a day. They do like 15. And I think that makes a big difference, both for, how the folks that work at the slaughterhouse are handling the animals and how the animals are coming in before they're slaughtered. Because I think, animals can, they can like smell what's happening. You know what I mean? But I think also too, if you ever buy a steak, whether it's beef or pork or lamb, and it's kind of speckled with darker red spots, that's what we call buckshot. And that means that the animal was stressed out at the time of slaughter. So basically, like their muscle seize, and as they're slaughtered, the blood kind of goes back into the muscle instead of the animal relaxing and then being bled out. It's still totally safe to eat. It's just kind of a sign that, like, maybe it wasn't the most perfect experience in the world. So just something to look out for.
Interesting. Got That Weed in the comments asks, I feel like plant-based meat will kick off. I guess that's more of a comment. But Erika, you were saying that you were vegetarian for a long time. Do y'all have any thoughts on plant-based meat, or maybe what the future of that might be?
Well, yes, I was a vegetarian for quite some time. I think I became one when I was 13, and then I kept on that path until I was like maybe 19 or so. But as a butcher, I will be the first to tell you that I actually love fake meat, like in the iteration of seitan and stuff like that. But that's just purely from like a like what kind, like, you know, liking food perspective, but when I really kind of like dig deeper into how it makes me feel and what it's about, and what's happening in the current food industry, I do find some issues with it. So as you said, it's taking off, and it's taking off quite well, right? I mean, we all know what you know, Beyond Meat is, and you know, as far as I'm concerned, right, like I think that it was birthed from a very noble kind of thought process around, like, you know, providing a healthy alternative. Like, I love the fact that like huge like uh like fast food chains now have things like Beyond Meat on their menu, because I think that that's, is like absolutely hands down a better option than the meat offerings that they have. But you know, I also find that it's tremendously like over processed, right? And like, I don't know if like folks have seen, like, you know, what's been like images floating around on the internet, and information about how, like, you know, the ingredients that are in Beyond Meat are like maybe like 2 ingredients off than like what goes in dog food, you know, like commercial dog food. So I start to think about like what are we actually putting in our bodies, like, because the whole thing, like my whole ethos on food in general and like what's good for you is based on like we are what we eat, right? Like you are what you put in your body. So to me, like I want to eat like real food. Like I want to eat like good ingredients that like were like grown wholesomely from the earth, that, you know, reflect how hard people worked to like put that food on my plate. You know what I mean? And I want to contribute to that in my best form of love language for my community and my wife and the people around me, right? So to me, like Beyond Meat kind of like strips all of that away, because I don't know what it's going to do to people in the long run. Like is this actually nutritious? Is it not? Like what are we eating? You know, it's like, that's just the question that I have. Like I really just want to know, like when I look at a food label, when I turn it around like at a grocery store, I'm looking for like simple ingredients that I can like actually understand what it is. You know what I mean? I don't want to put chemicals in my body. I don't want to put like processed stuff in my body. So then that's really what informs me to think about like the bigger picture. I do think though that the world does think that fake meat is the solution to a lot of our environmental issues. And if it is, cool. You know what I mean? Like that makes me like happy to know that like we're gonna save the planet. You know what I'm saying? But I kind of just don't believe that. So I don't know. I'm kind of like sitting here waiting and hoping to see positive things come from big, massive changes that we're making, you know, as a society to move towards, you know, like lab grown meats and yeah, like, you know, vegetarian meat alternatives, so to speak.
You said you ask yourself, what am I eating? And I think that really gets to the heart of it, no matter what it is you're eating, whether it's a vegetable or meat, just really knowing what it is you're putting in your mouth. If you're just now joining us, we are speaking with Jocelyn Guest and Erika Nakamura, the founders of the Butcher Girls, which is a virtual butcher shop and meat subscription service. We've got them on the line for about 10 more minutes. So if you have any questions about butchering, put it in the comment section or raise your hand in the app. We have another question from Grounded Kush. Thank you for being so involved. They ask, I've known about using pineapple juice to use to tenderize meats. Is this true for honey as well?
Ooh, honey, I'm not sure of. Pineapple juice, absolutely. A lot of it is based on the acid levels in whatever you're using to marinate with. Like the idea is that higher acid, you know, additives like, you know, it could even be like something like lemon juice, or it could be like a variety of things actually, but it helps break down some of the connective tissue in the meat that allows the meat to kind of relax a little bit more when you're preparing it. So that's why you would use it for like tenderizing. When it comes to, you know, ideas more along the lines of like marinating, right? Marinating can also be a level of tenderizing. But I think that if you're really preparing like wonderful, delicious meat, you probably don't need a tenderizing element. You know what I mean? Like you could certainly do that, but I think that, like, you know, if you're treating the meat that you got well, the way it's supposed to be treated, then you probably don't need to add something like pineapple juice unless you're doing it for like flavor, you know. And there are certain dishes that certainly call for it as an ingredient. But I guess what I'm saying is, like, if you're braising something, for example, right? You're usually braising a harder, tougher working muscle. So it could be a cut off of the shoulder, it could be a cut off of the rib or the leg. But you want to imagine like how hard the animal works to move around, and like those are the bigger muscles that usually benefit from like a long and slow cooking method. So, you know, that's either like, you know, roasting super slow in your oven at like 250, 275, right? Or like it's braising in a pot, or even throwing it in an Instant Pot under pressure or whatever, but you're still cooking it at a slow and low kind of vibe. And that's ultimately what's going to provide tenderness. So you're kind of like preparing the meat the way it wants to be prepared so that it gives you the ultimate bite that it is able to offer.
Speaking of low and slow and different ways to prepare meat, do you have any thoughts about sous vide?
You know, I really love that there's like all these at-home sous vide machines now. I think, you know, not only from a sustainability perspective, where like you can take something that's kind of like a hard, tough working muscle and pop it in a bag and cook it for 36 hours and then sear it when you get off work and have like this amazing dinner. I think that's awesome. But I think also it really empowers people to do stuff they maybe wouldn't do otherwise. We don't sous vide a ton here. We do like some ready to heat and cook things. Like we do a porchetta and lamb shanks and stuff like that. We also use sous vide for our turkey deli meat, just because I think you know, you can achieve like a certain amount of precision that you can't achieve in a regular oven, which is really great. And if you don't need color on it, I think it's awesome. Yeah, but I dig it. I know people get really, really yipped up about the reverse sear or not, which I don't have strong emotions about. I think I usually sous vide first and sear after, but that's just me. I don't know if Erika has a strong opinion about that.
I do. Ha! You know
Shocker.
what? I find that when you're sous videing, like, yeah, reverse searing it's something you can do even without a sous vide machine necessarily, right? Like you could like just kind of throw your meat directly in the oven at a low temperature and let it hang out for until you've achieved the doneness that you want, and then you pull it out of there and then onto a screaming hot pan to just like get a sear on it, right? That's what we're talking about. But I do find that like if you're gonna sous vide and you reverse sear, there are a couple things that I find happens that's just kind of like weird to me. Number one is that like if you sear your steak first and then you put it into a sous vide bag with your aromatics, then you seal it and you pop it into your water bath or whatever, what's gonna end up happening is that, first of all, unless you really, really cool down your steak, like throw it in the freezer or whatever, like get it like super duper cold, it's not gonna actually create like a proper seal in your sous vide bag because it's going to be creating steam inside the bag. Does that make sense? So like it, and you want the seal to be very tight with no air in the sous vide bag, because otherwise the bag's going to float in your water bath. Like there's moving, like it's a moving target of like more and more bullshit that you're going to have to deal with in order to like get it to actually sit in the water bath and cook at the temperature that it's supposed to after the fact. So that's why I find that to be problematic. The second thing that I also find to be problematic is that, like, at least for me, when I get a steak or like a sizzling piece of meat on my plate, right? The part that I look forward to the most, like there's two parts. Number one is like that like perfect mid-rare, like juicy, like beautiful red right in the middle. And then the second part is the crispiness on the outside. It's called a Maillard reaction, and it's kind of like the amino acids that develop off the protein when it gets fried or when it gets like extreme heat. So that's like the brown crispy bits, right? It gives it a whole nother dimension of flavor and kind of like different sugars in your mouth that is the thing that we all think about as like this like yummy steak flavor. So that kind of like, I feel like it kind of goes away a little bit when you like take that and then vacuum seal it into a bag and then now you're like cooking it. So like, I don't know. I want that crispiness like fresh in my mouth. You know what I mean?
I do love a crispy steak. All right, we've got a couple of folks on the stage. Unlikely Bird, if you could please unmute yourself and ask your question. And you can unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon in the lower left-hand corner. It might take just a moment. All right, while we're waiting for Unlikely Bird, it looked like Hold My Apple. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, please.
Sorry. I just wanted to see what's your opinion on keeping steak juicy? I tend to run into where like you can temp it and time it right, but it still ends up being dry. So like what's your take on keeping beef or steak? Because I always cook a lot of steak bites and stuff like that, and they end up being dry, and I hate that. But I just wanted to see if there's another way to kind of fix that.
Go ahead, Josh.
Are you resting it after you cook it?
Yes. But I think I end up having to dry out a little too long, or I probably overcooked it. There's something wrong there.
Right. So... I think when in doubt, undercook it and rest it longer, because it's like what Erika was talking about earlier with that residual heat carrying over. So like with our rare roast beef, for example, like rare is technically, you pull it at like 125, but we pull ours at 117 and then it goes straight into the walk-in to rest. Because then, that's like a big 8-degree difference. So it stays like nice and juicy and red and everything. So I think what I would do is I would try to cook it less. And then when you rest it with the side that was just on the pan up. Because that way, that side that was just next to the heat, the juices will run down from that side throughout the rest of the steak. And then I would tint it with foil and rest it for at least 10 minutes, if not 15.
Okay. Yeah,
I have a question. I have a question about the cut of meat that you're cooking also. Is it like, I guess, how thick is it is number one. How lean is it? Like, is it a super fatty steak or is it something that's pretty lean? And then lastly, I guess my other question is, what's your perfect temp? Like if I ask you how you like your steak prepared at a restaurant, like waiters and waitresses ask all the time, right? Like what temperature do you want your steak cooked to? Do you like medium rare? Do you like a medium, or are you somebody who likes well done?
I like medium well steaks, and I tend to go for the 8-ounce lean versus the fatty. I tend to steer very clear from the fat, even though it's good. But this is what I do. But yeah, that's, and the thickness of my steaks are morely like, I don't know. When I go to the shop, it's what they give me. I'd say 8-ounce.
So I think what I'm hearing is that, like your steak would be less dry if you got a fattier steak. That's number one. Number two is that like an 8-ounce steak is perfectly good. Like I think 8 ounces is almost too much for one person to have. So like usually Jocelyn and I would like split an 8-ounce steak between the two of us. But Yeah, I think like if it's a fattier cut, then it's more forgiving, so it'll give you more of a juiciness, right? And then the last thing I wanted to say is that you should try maybe brining your steak first. And by that I mean like it becomes like a 2-day process, so it's kind of annoying. But I really encourage you to try it. So like if you take a steak and you create a brine, which is like it's a salt and sugar and water kind of like solution, right? Usually like 10% like sugar salt kind of into the water, and you can also like add like garlic cloves, or you can add bay leaf, like coriander seeds or something. You want to create this solution, and once it's cold you add your steak to it and you let it hang out in that solution for like maybe like it I would say like 4 to 12 hours. So like overnight is fine. And then you pull it out and you let it, like you pat it dry and you let it hang out on your plate for like and in the refrigerator until you're gonna cook it. That salt water that kind of like got absorbed into the meat is gonna give you like this additional juiciness that I bet you is gonna blow your mind.
I did not know that you could brine steak, so that I am definitely taking this advice and running with it. Thanks.
Can I ask something?
Yeah, it looks like we have time for one more question. So, Apple Juice, please go ahead.
Okay. Do you guys want to? Since like I'm Middle Eastern, right? I don't really have steak that much, only with like soup and stuff. And I really like to have it with like tomato soup. With these things, my mom says are called lady fingers. I don't know. They're green, but yeah. But I heard steak tastes good. And also, what do you think about rice? I prefer it soft.
Wait, so you're putting rice into your soup, is that right?
Oh, no, we put soup in our rice. It's like a Middle Eastern thing.
Oh, that sounds really yummy. Talk to me more about this lady finger situation. What does it look like?
So it's like a green bean. It's like hexagonal. Like a hexagonal cone.
Is it okra, maybe? Okra, perhaps?
In my native language, we call them bomye, and I'll do some research on it. But they're really good when you put them in like tomato soup.
That sounds amazing. So you don't really use meat in the soup preparation?
Oh, I do.
What kind of meat goes in?
For tomato, we use lamb or beef. Mostly, it's all halal meat because Muslim and Middle Eastern. But we also have like this other soup called ofgespi. In Kurdish, soup is ofge, right? And when we have ofgespi, we usually have like chicken or turkey or maybe even lamb. Oh, and chickpeas.
So do you start with like searing off the meat and then you add vegetables and then your liquid in order to kind of braise it and break it down, or what's the process like?
Oh, first you have to like defrost everything and yeah.
So I guess to me, at least when I'm making soups, I really and I love soup actually. I'm like a soup monster, if you will. But what I love so much about soup is that you can also use the bones from your meat as part of the flavoring, right? So what we like to do is we'll roast the bones and then make a broth or stock from it, usually with mirepoix. And then mirepoix is like the trifecta of like carrots, onions, celery. But you can also skip that and use other vegetables too. So it's kind of like a great place it's a wonderful like vehicle for sustainability when it comes to utilizing the whole animal. And then that can become the base, and it becomes this like nice rich base for your soup. So then on top of that, you can use some of the less desirable cuts, so to speak. I guess that's kind of like a bad way to put it, but the bigger working muscles and the cuts that you don't normally see like as a steak preparation, but most of the animal isn't actually compiled of muscles that are super tender, right? Like it takes a lot of time and TLC, a lot of attention and, slow cooking methods to get it to be like super like tender and delicious. So I feel like soup is the ultimate sleeper in terms of cooking or preparation and method for like super yummy meat dishes.
Oh, that's cool. They make gravy from like bone marrow, and yeah, there is a bone in the soup and stuff. And I just really like my native food, I guess.
I think that learning about your native food and traditions and your family, like how your mom or dad made something, how your grandparents made something, it's an incredible way of like telling the story of your family and your people, you know what I mean? And so for me, like, my dad, who is Japanese, and I was actually born and raised in Tokyo, but my dad is like the better cook of the two of the parents that I have. My mom is a better baker, so I actually got the baking gene too, so I get an itch to like make cookies and bread and stuff too. But I do love like how my dad prepares food, and I love watching him and the methods that he uses, because I know that my grandmother taught him. And it's rare to see men in Japan do a lot of home style cooking, so like I love that about my dad too. And so it kind of just completes the story of like who I am and who my kids will be, and I love all that so much. So thanks for sharing that.
Thank you so much for your question, Apple Juice. And I want to extend a huge thank you to you, Erika and Jocelyn, for joining us today. We're at the end of our time, but before we leave, Erika and Jocelyn, where can people find you? Or please tell us a little bit about the Butcher Girls virtual butcher shop.
So as you were saying, Butcher Girls is an online meat subscription service. I do actually think that you don't have to subscribe these days to get one-off items, but we still encourage subscribing because it is the ultimate sustainable way for us to run our business. But we specialize in local, sustainable, well-raised meats. We love to educate folks on how to prepare various dishes, how to cook different cuts of meat so that you feel empowered to try new things. You can find us online at www.butchergirls.co. And you can also find me on Instagram as The Butcherette. You can find Jocelyn on Instagram as Jossie Goo. We love to engage, and yeah, I mean, we're always happy to answer questions about how to cook things, and just kind of trying to enrich people's dinner tables. So thanks so much for having us.
I've learned so much. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And if you want to hear more from me, I'm one of the hosts of Pod Appétit Gourmet Takes. You can find us on your favorite podcatcher or at podappetitpodcast.com. And stay tuned to our food to see when the next talk is coming up. There will be a pinned post with more information. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you again to Erika and Jocelyn. You can find them at ny.butchergirls.co. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Pod Appétit Gourmet Takes.
We'd love to hear from you, so find us on Twitter and Instagram at pod_appétit.
And on Facebook at Pod Appétit Podcast.
You can also email us at podappetitpodcast@gmail.com and find all of our episodes on our website, podappetitpodcast.com.
everyone, I'm Kelly.
And I'm Emily, and we're from Whining About Herstory.
Ever notice how women seem to be missed, forgotten, or maybe even purposely left out of history books?
We did, so we decided to take the his out of history and make it herstory.
Each episode, we discuss the lives and general awesomeness of these historical Wonder Women, all while having a glass of wine.
Or maybe a bottle. Come join us on all of your favorite podcast platforms at WAH Pod on Instagram, WAH_pod on Twitter, and at whiningaboutherstory.com. Remember, that's no H or E in whining.
See you
soon.
Cheers!